Right. Okay. So I would like to welcome all councillors, officers and members of the public viewing on YouTube to this virtual meeting of the Planning Committee on Wednesday, the 26th of August, 2020 at 2 o'clock. My name is Councillor Matt McCabe and I am the chair of the committee. I will now call out the names of the other members of the committee who will be speaking, who will be making the decisions today, and ask them to confirm that they are present. First of all, Councillor Vic Clark.
Present.
Sue Craig.
Present.
Sally Davis.
Present.
Lucy Hodge.
Present.
Duncan Hounsell.
Present.
Sean Hughes.
Present.
Eleanor Jackson. Councillor Jackson.
Just coming in now, Chair.
Eleanor, I'm just checking to hear that you're present. Can you hear us, Eleanor? Let me just carry on then. Councillor Hal McPhee.
Present.
Amanda Rigby.
Present.
Also present should be legal advisor Simon Elias.
Present.
Team manager, development management, Rich Stott.
Present.
And Marie Todd, the Democratic Services Officer.
Is present.
The planning case officers are also in attendance to present their reports and answer questions along with the highways officer, Darren Cox. Let me just go back and see if Councillor Jackson, can you hear us? Eleanor, can you hear us? Well, let me just carry on with the introduction then. Can I remind everyone to keep background noise to a minimum? Only to speak one person at a time, not to speak over others. Please mute your microphones when not speaking and then unmute them when I invite you to speak. Please indicate if you wish to speak by using the chat facility on Zoom by typing MIS, may I speak, and I will call you to speak in turn. If a member of the committee has to leave the meeting, then please draw my attention to this by using the chat facility. If you subsequently return to the meeting, then please also draw my attention to this in the same way. Members should also inform me if they lose connection and miss part of the meeting, as this may result in them not being able to vote on any item they did not hear in full. When the committee is ready to take a vote, I will read out each member's name. Members should clearly state for, against, or abstain. Councillor Jackson, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Right. One problem we've got already is that the person who is supposed to be on the end of the telephone for answering problems is not there. That's what I was doing when you could see my picture. I was ringing Miss Hughes and she's not there. But otherwise I'm here, I hope, and we'll be staying.
Fingers crossed, yes. Okay, so let's move to apologies of absence and substitutions. Democratic Services Officer will give details of any apologies for absence or substitutions.
Yeah, there are no apologies for absence, Chair.
Okay, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Hang on, let me see. Councillor Clark.
Yeah, only that I'm a member of the Royal Society for Protection of Birds, but it won't affect any decisions I might make today.
Okay, thank you. Was there anybody else? Councillor Davis?
Yes, on agenda item 9, where we note planning appeals, I have an interest in one of them if we should discuss it. Normally we note it and therefore there's no discussion, but if we should discuss it, then I would ask to be removed from the meeting.
Okay. Anyone else? Just looking down the pictures. Councillor McPhee.
Just to mention about our interest in the Lib Dems application.
Oh yes, during the there's two planning application, or a planning application and a listed buildings application regarding James Street West. Myself, Councillor McPhee, Councillor Rigby will be removing ourselves, or we will be removed from this meeting whilst that is discussed, as we have an interest in the building. And Councillor Rigby, did you have any additional?
Yes, thank you, Chair. In addition to the listed building and planning application for James Street West, I will also be speaking as ward councillor, but not participating further, although I shall be watching the application, the listed building application for Cleveland Bridge.
Thank you. And that's about it. Yep, not seeing anything else. So there is no urgent business. Item 3. We have statements and questions from the public. So the Democratic Services Officer will now inform you of the public speaking procedure.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the public have registered to speak about individual planning applications under item 6 on the agenda. Ward councillors not on the committee have also indicated that they wish to speak about applications. Speakers will be called to speak immediately after the case officer has made their presentation about the application. The order of speakers and the time allowed for speaking will be as follows. Objectors to an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. Supporters of an application will be allowed 3 minutes in total. If there is more than one objector or supporter of an application, they must share the 3 minutes allowed to each side. Ward councillors not on the committee who have indicated that they wish to speak about an application may do so for a maximum of 5 minutes. On this occasion, the chair has allowed 10 minutes to both sides for both the Englishcombe Lane and the Mineral Hospital applications. I will time the speeches and inform the chair using the chat function when the time is up. The chair will then ask speakers to immediately conclude their remarks. After making their statement, speakers will remain in the meeting so that they can observe the debate. However, they have no further right to speak and so should mute their microphone and switch off their video. They should not make any comment using the chat function. Once their item has finished, speakers will be removed from Zoom and can view the rest of the meeting on YouTube if they wish.
Thank you, Marie. I would just mention, I see there's a question that's gone into the chat. The chat function is solely for the use of the committee members and officers. It's not for use for anybody else in this instance. And the other thing I forgot to mention was I will be endeavouring to take more regular breaks, roughly an hour on the hour, depending on where we are with a decision. Minutes of the last meeting, the minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Am I okay to sign these as a correct record at some future date in line with social distancing guidelines? Could I have somebody to propose?
Happy to propose.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Happy somebody to second.
I'll second.
Councillor Hounsell, thank you very much. So I'll take that everyone's happy that I can sign those at a future date. Okay, or there are no objections to me doing that. That's great, thank you. So we can move on to the main plans list. This is the land to the rear of 89 to 123 Englishcombe Lane, Bath. Can I invite the case officer, Tessa Hamden, to present her report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen with you. Okay, so yes, this application relates to Englishcombe Lane, land to the rear of 89 to 123 Englishcombe Lane, and seeks planning permission for the development of 37 residential dwellings, including affordable housing, vehicle and pedestrian access, open space, landscape, drainage, related infrastructure and engineering works. The members will have noted the update report. This provides a number of clarifications to the committee report. This included clarification that the Natural England comments related to the Habitats Regulation Assessment. Members should also be aware that the net gain figure in the committee report, which was taken from the submitted net gain metric, is incorrect and should read 64.9%. There was an error in the net gain metric spreadsheet, but the submitted ecology report quoted the correct figure and the conclusions of that report were based on that figure. This does not alter the conclusions of the committee report. As noted within the committee report, the result of the metric does not supersede the requirements of the policies to be met. So the application site is edged in red. It's bound by residential properties Englishcombe Lane and Sturtingale Road, and to the south by Sturtingale Farm. The site is within the City of Bath Conservation Area and the wider World Heritage Site, and is accessed off Englishcombe Lane. The site forms part of a wider site of nature conservation interest. The site overall is ecologically highly sensitive, with features including 2 for flushes. The site is also allocated for development in the placemaking plan for around 40 dwellings. The plan to the right of the slide is the allocation plan. The aerial photograph more clearly shows the site in context. The existing site survey illustrates the site and the topography. The slight slopes from the north Englishcombe Lane to the south at Sturtingale Farm. So as just noted, the site is ecologically sensitive. The diagram shows the extent of the SNCI, with the central green annotation being the Sturtingale SNCI, with the site outlined in purple. The second plan at the bottom of the slide outlines existing habitats within the site, which includes the 2 for flushes, which are the pink lines. The photographs on the side are of the flushes. So this is the proposed layout. The development will be accessed via an upgraded access of Englishcombe Lane, which the next slide will show in a bit more detail. The site will contain a mixture of terraces, semi-detached properties and an apartment block, and will include 11 affordable units. The apartment block will be to the north of the site, adjacent to the rear boundary of Englishcombe Lane dwellings. Those that run parallel to Sturtingale Road will step up, following the general topography of the site. The parking will be dispersed throughout the site with a mixture of garages, carports, on-plot and off-street parking. There'll be areas retained and created habitat on the site. So this slide details the improved access. This includes a build out to retain a 6.75 metre wide carriageway on Englishcombe Lane. The access road will be a 4.3 metre access road with a 1.5 metre footway. This is some photographs of the access. Members visited the site last week, so will be aware of the site. But this shows the access and the access when looking along Englishcombe Lane. This visual gives an outline of the house types. There are 8 house types plus the apartment block. The units will be constructed from buff brick, timber and clay tiles. So I'll run quickly through the house types. House plot type 1, this is located to the northeast of the site, closest to the access, and is one of the larger house types with rooms in the roof, with an attached garage, and is from brick, timber and clay pantile roofs. House type 2 is linked to house type 1 by the garages and is of a similar design. House type 3 sits centrally within the site. It's semi-detached timber constructed dwelling with rooms in the roof. House type 4 is semi-detached dwelling constructed from brick and timber. It's at the boundary of Englishcombe Lane. Now, this is house type 5. It's 3-bedroom dwelling within a terrace adjacent to the boundary of Sturtingale Road and is brick and timber. Now, this is house type 6. These are the 3-storey properties running perpendicular to Englishcombe Lane, centrally within the site. This is house type 7, which is 2-bedroom dwelling located to the north of the site, adjacent to Englishcombe Lane. House type 8, which is 3-bedroom dwelling adjacent to Englishcombe Lane. These are the floor plans of the apartments, which sit parallel to Englishcombe Lane. There are 2 floors with a basement containing a plant room. These are the elevations of the apartment blocks. These are some visuals of the site. So the top visuals are the properties as you enter the site, and then the bottom one is as you're within the site looking across to Sturtingale Road. These are just some more visuals. These are the landscaping plans. So this shows a significant amount of landscaping within the scheme, with the main two fir partly retained centrally, with habitats created within the site. So this is the slide showing the drainage layout. The drainage strategy follows the principal discharge route through the site, with additional catch pipes and tanks to the north of the site. The pipes control the flow across the site into the drainage channels in Englishcombe Lane. The catchment and release of water in a more controlled manner is a betterment on the existing situation. So these are the sections through the site. Section A shows the dwellings backing onto Sturtingale Road. Section C is looking at the dwellings towards Englishcombe Lane. Section D is the section centrally within the site. B and J is kind of sections moving up the site, and E is the dwellings to the front of the site. And these are just another section diagrams. This is through the site, through Englishcombe Lane up to the south of the site at various points through the site. It just runs through some photographs. Obviously, members, as I said, have visited the site. So the viewpoint 1 is the access into the site. Viewpoint 2 is looking across the site from the access towards Sturtingale Road. View 3 is looking down Sturtingale Road, showing the house types. View 4 is along Englishcombe Lane. And view 5 is looking to Sturtingale Road towards the site. These are some photographs of the top ones of Englishcombe Lane properties with the site behind. The photograph to the right is looking from the site to Englishcombe Lane, and then the bottom photograph is Sturtingale Road. These are some photographs looking across the city towards the site. So you can see the blue outlines on the hillside is the application site. So this shows the offsetting site at Pennyquick, which members also visited last week. And then this is the habitats on Pennyquick, which includes grassland, 2-foot flush, and scrubland. So the application is recommended for approval, subject to the preparation of section 106 to secure the planning obligations as outlined in the committee report. Thank you.
You're muted.
You're on mute, Matt. You're on mute, Matt.
And there was a moment of absolute genius there, and we've missed it. So thank you very much for that. And now we come to public speakers, and I have 4 members of the public to speak against, and then 4. So I've got David Roberts, Danny Groves, David Sartin, and Jackie Pethwick. You're down to share 10 minutes. So if you're happy to run one into the other, then we'll go from there. So is David Roberts there first, please?
I am, Chair. If you can hear me,
yes,
see me this time.
That's
okay.
Great.
I'll be quick because we've only got 10 minutes. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak and for taking the time to come and visit the field. It is appreciated by all the residents. That said, I should add that this democratic process has been undermined somewhat as the developer this week has already begun the prep work to ready the field for demolition. This has caused much dismay amongst the residents, not surprisingly. Moving on, the points I'd like to call out are around design, local context and drainage. Policy D2, local character and distinctiveness. I know beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but having visited the field, can you really agree with the developer's assertion that this is an attractive development which presents significant benefits to the local area? There are no houses, apartments made from brick or clad in timber, either adjacent to the field or on the northern side of Englishcombe Lane. There is a distant single exception, I admit, referred to in the planning officer's report, but that is 100 metres away from the field. I ask you as guardians of a World Heritage City to carefully consider the aesthetic merit of this development and whether buff brick and timber really resonates with the local neighbourhood. I also hope you follow the council's own very explicit design guidance, which states, I quote, "We expect all new development to be of the highest quality and are fully committed to raising the standard of design throughout the district." My last point, SU1, sustainable drainage. The applicant's agent stated in the last meeting that the suds drainage maintenance scheme is considered standard. Why then can't he articulate how much this will cost residents, especially as the cost now has to be absorbed by only 23 of the 37 dwellings? The Felf residents have asked ADL repeatedly for this figure, and the case officer herself said this was material consideration, yet it has never been published. That's all I wanted to say on behalf of the group. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak, Chair.
Thank you. Danny Groves?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd also like to thank the committee for the 3-minute opportunity to speak here today. However, after speaking on this matter at the last committee meeting and contributing on the sensitive issue of ecology in written correspondence sent to each member in recent days and weeks, I don't think I need 3 minutes to go over once again the obvious ecological destruction that will be caused to this site if you allow this proposed development to go ahead. I shouldn't need to reiterate that the site is located within an area considered by this council to be of county level importance for nature conservation and receives protection under policy NE3 of the Baines placemaking plan. Or remind you all that the council's own ecologist working with external experts objected to this development because of permanent loss of habitats, which are key contributing feature to the site's SNCI value, and that this objection extended to the proposal not sufficiently avoiding, minimising, mitigating and compensating for ecological impacts such that will result in no net loss to ecology. I shouldn't need to clarify again that a rare and extremely important feature for local ecology, tufa, highlighted as vulnerable in Somerset by the Environment Agency, will be destroyed. Instead, what I did want to remind you all of today is the brilliant and forward-thinking steps that this council took just weeks ago when it unanimously passed a motion declaring an ecological emergency. An emergency declared because we are facing nothing short of an ecological crisis. A declaration that, to quote the council, has been passed to resist the destruction of habitats. You all voted for this positive step and you should be applauded for doing so. In doing so, you did a great thing for future generations. So for all the reasons mentioned above, wouldn't it be an absolute travesty if, when faced with probably the first big test of that declaration, you failed? In terms of climate crisis and ecological emergency, we now need action, not just words. We need brave leadership, not just hollow votes. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, and David Sartin. David, are you there? Yes, indeed.
Thank you to the committee for the opportunity to speak at today's meeting. The Council's Conservation, Ecology, Landscape and Urban Design Officers, together with the Council for Protection of Rural England, have reportedly objected to the proposal on various grounds, including ecological destruction of habitat, layout, scale, density of units and materials to be utilised. Whilst it is noted that the placemaking plan identifies the site as potential residential development for 40 units, at that point in time there was no knowledge of the highly destructive impact it would have on the ecology within the site and other issues. Point 4 of SB 17 requires design principles to protect ecological interest. The proposal clearly fails to protect or minimise effects on the ecology by this overdevelopment. With constraints on the ecology, poor access, transport links, drainage issues and slope stabilisation known about today, this site would surely have been reconsidered as not suitable for 37 units. In considering other policies, ST7, the Stage 1 road safety audit on the site access arrangement should have been requested by the highway officers at a level of independent inspection. Considering the minimal standard highway and pedestrian link proposed on a school route with potential for vehicular conflict in this location, if approved without one, this will set a strong precedent that Baines will find hard to argue against on future planning applications on highway terms. With regards to SU1, Sustainable Drainage Policy, the such drainage system comes with stringent management requirements that have not been identified as sustainable in cost terms, nor in all probability will be maintained in perpetuity by tenants, landlords, or house purchasers. PCS6 relating to land stability of the ground above the site and effect on the lower lying identified landslip loads have not been explored or identified and must be identifiable concern to any purchasers. The Council have not undertaken any site investigations on higher lying slopes on Sturtingale Farm, where further landslip may occur, impacting on the proposed development. The risk of movement of the spring activity has not been addressed, with implications on the drainage scheme and its future maintenance leading to possible future flooding and damp issues to properties. Flow calculations from the springs have not been measured. Seasonal variation nor impact on drainage calculations assessed adequately in the modelling. With regard to the proposal to translate the TUFRA, has the cost of this been assessed adequately in relation to the development proposal, not only in financial terms, but cost of transportation, carbon footprint, access implications, and future maintenance? It is noticed that an approval based on the information supplied to this planning committee to date, if approved, will set a very large precedent for future planning applications within Baines. Notwithstanding the above, we believe that if this site is developed, the number of units should be reduced and reconsidered in a meaningful way to provide an economic development with suitable, adequate access for a limited number of units, safeguarding the ecology, limiting the need for major expense in uneconomic earthworks with minimal drainage works, all of which is achievable on the site if considered sympathetically. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jackie Pethwick.
Hello. Our fields are conservation area. It's very difficult to understand why this council-owned field is not classified in the same categories. Baines Ecology and Conservation Department object to the development due to the presence of tougher flushes and vulnerable and increasing rare habitats. In addition to these very important issues against the development, the practicalities of building on unstable, waterlogged land with moving springs would be disastrous. Contrary to the statement in the Litchfield report, Sturtingale Farm has not been visited by any council member or their representatives. If the council or their representatives had visited our farm, we could have shown them numerous sites where the land is unstable due to the underground springs. Our farmland contains numerous springs which change their source location due to the constant shift of the land. Therefore, what is adequate in 1 week may be totally inadequate the next. Our fields adjacent to the development site are in a constant state of instability. In dry weather, large fissures appear and the land quite often slips, leaving gaping holes. We've recently had to have 5 tons of topsoil delivered to fill these holes and make them safe. Drainage of this proposed development will be a major issue, as it has been a serious problem for years. Numerous attempts have been made on this council site to install land drainage without any before the work commenced. Development on unstable land would no doubt cause constant problems to the adjacent properties, with landslides and flooding in wet weather and drying and cracking of the ground in dry and hot weather, which could undermine the footings and stability of older properties along the boundary of the new development. Developing this site would almost certainly result in a significant overspend, which would ultimately be paid for by Baines residents. Trying to develop this site with all the clear evidence against the proposal would be an ecological disaster and could be considered negligent and unauthorised use of public funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. We got most of that. I hope everyone felt that they got the gist of Jackie's statement there. The sound quality wasn't very good. Can I then move to Gareth Williams and Graham Sayborn? First of all, Gareth Williams, who is the agent for the developer, and Graham Sayborn on behalf of the applicant as well. Again, you're sharing 10 minutes. Gareth, are you there?
Are you able to start the video for me? I cannot start video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, Mike, can we allow Gareth to run a video?
Okay, great.
Okay.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. My name is Gareth Williams. I'm the agent for this planning application. The application is put forward by the council for the proposed development of 37 dwellings, 14 of which will be affordable. The scheme will be developed by Aquis Construction and is partly funded by a Homes England grant of £1.2 million that has been secured by the council. The proposed development site is a residential allocation in the council's adopted placemaking plan for around 40 dwellings. The principle of development was considered acceptable by the council in preparing and publishing the plan, and the position was endorsed by the independent planning inspector in June 2017, when she concluded that the plan was sound. The placemaking plan was the subject of comprehensive sustainability appraisal and a habitats regulation assessment. In conformity with policy SP17, the ecological constraints of the site have been fully considered and addressed, including the SNCI, tufa habitat, bats, reptiles and badgers. It has been formally confirmed by the council ecologist and Natural England, following an appropriate assessment, that the project would not have an adverse effect on the Bath and Bradford-on-Avon SAC. The ecological mitigation put forward by the applicant is comprehensive and can be summarised as follows. Retention and creation of 0.38 hectares of tufa and wet flush habitat on site. Securing council-owned land at Pennyquick as an offsetting site, create an additional 0.17 hectares of new additional tufa flush habitat, as well as over 4 hectares of grassland habitat. The amount of grassland habitat created is approximately 4 times what is being lost at Englishcombe Lane. There will be a net increase in the length of the tufa flush from 262 metres on site now to 557 metres on completion of the work at both Englishcombe Lane and Pennyquick, an increase of over 110%. Also, the scheme preserves 73% of the existing tufa flush at Englishcombe Lane. A habitat enhancement area has been provided on site, providing mitigation for reptiles, bats, badgers and other fauna. Bat commuting corridors are retained by the provision of a dark corridor along the eastern boundary and increased areas of foraging habitat on site. As is required by NPPF, we've used the DEFRA biodiversity metric tool, and this demonstrates a total biodiversity net gain of 64.9% across the site and the offsetting site. UK HAB classifications do not include a category for tufa flush, therefore calculations for this habitat type is excluded from the biodiversity metric. The approach has been discussed and agreed with the council ecologist and follows the good practice guidance. The provision of new tufa flush channels is included within a bespoke compensation strategy and demonstrates that there is a net gain in the tufa habitat across both sites. The tufa flush currently on site has been formed from spring water on Sturtingale Farm. The spring water has been allowed to flow over ground over the past few years as ditches have become blocked. The flush could therefore disappear at any time, either by the spring drying up or if the owner of Sturtingale Farm clears out these ditches. The applicant has identified and secured a site which contains its own spring, which is also a tufa spring. Therefore, creating additional flush at Pennyquick Lane will preserve tufa habitat in the local area in the event that the spring above the site at Englishcombe Lane fails to deliver water to the site. In addition, both tufa sites will be actively managed, which is currently not the case. We note that residents and ward members have made reference to the council's declaration of an ecological emergency. We fully respect this declaration, and the comprehensive package of ecological mitigation put forward is testament to this. However, the declaration of an ecological emergency does not negate the need for the council to meet other targets, such as the delivery of homes and affordable homes on allocated sites where the ecological assets have been appropriately considered. The planning application still needs to be considered in accordance with the development plan, which confirms that this site is allocated for residential development. There are no technical objections in relation to transport, ground stability or drainage. We note some local residents have objected in relation to the SEDS drainage maintenance scheme. However, we would reiterate that the drainage scheme is a standard SEDS scheme that has been designed to be robust and easily maintained, as is required by policy SU1 of the placemaking plan. In the unlikely event of a blockage, then an overground flood route has been incorporated into the scheme to direct water to the highway drainage on Englishcombe Lane. The drainage scheme will provide a betterment compared to the existing situation on site. In addition to the affordable housing, the scheme will also provide SIL payments, and Section 106 agreement will secure a financial contribution towards parks, targeted recruitment and training, and a fire hydrant. Grant funding has been obtained to manage and maintain Pennyquick for a 30-year period, and this can be carefully monitored and controlled by the Section 106 agreement. To conclude, we would reiterate that the proposed development site is an existing residential location in the adopted Bath placemaking plan, and therefore the principle of development is established. In accordance with policy SB 17, the ecological interests have been carefully assessed, and the scheme sensitively protects and enhances these aspects and mitigates through a comprehensive package of ecological works to avoid or minimise the effects and to provide an overall biodiversity net gain. We considered the application should be determined in accordance with the statutory development plan. We respectfully request that you support the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I call on Graham Sayborn, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, indeed. Nice to see you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Graham Sayborn. I am Head of Housing for the Council, and I would like to speak in favour of this planning application. The agent has spoken in detail about the scheme, and I hope provided reassurance on the ecological mitigation, particularly around the preservation of the tufa. However, I wanted to draw members' attention to how this scheme will contribute to meeting the housing needs of Bath residents. The current strategic market housing assessment identified a need for almost 12,000 new homes in the district. As members will be aware, the opportunities to provide additional housing in the city is very limited. And as such, if we do not proceed with viable schemes on allocated sites, the problem will simply get worse. However, of particular concern to me is that we have an acute shortage of affordable housing. Indeed, we have over 2,000 households on the housing register looking for affordable homes in Bath, with over 200 households specifying a preference for the moorlands area. Yet in the last financial year, only 17 affordable housing properties became available in that ward, only 2 of which were houses. As such, the 11 policy compliant homes that this scheme will produce, of which 5 are houses, will be a great help to local residents. However, given the need for more affordable housing in the locality, my service has agreed to gap fund the purchase of 3 additional homes. This means that the scheme will now be providing 14 affordable homes, which is almost 40% of the entire scheme. In addition, these affordable homes, just like the remainder of the scheme, will be very energy efficient and designed to meet the AECB energy efficiency standard, which includes very high levels of insulation, PV solar panels, and air source heat pumps. This will reduce carbon dioxide emissions by up to 70% compared to a standard home. However, just as importantly, it will reduce energy bills by around 50%, thus making these affordable homes even more affordable to live in. In summary, this scheme will provide 37 very energy efficient homes, including 14 much needed affordable homes for local residents. And that is why I wanted to speak in favour of this council application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Graham. Can I ask the ward councillor, Councillor Jess David, if she's there, please?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed, Jess. Please go ahead. I think you have 6 minutes. Is that correct, Marie?
I think I've got 5.
5 minutes.
Oh, 5 minutes, yeah.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Thank you to all members of the Planning Committee for taking time to consider this application carefully, including making a site visit to Englishcombe Lane and to Pennyquick. I'm very grateful that this application has come to committee. As a council application on council land, I think it's vital for transparency that this decision is made in public. I also wanted to thank the officers for their time in responding to questions on this application, particularly Tessa. I know it's not an easy job for committee members. This is a complex site with a judgment to be made about the benefits of delivering new homes in this location against the harm to ecology on site. I have looked at other sites for development in our local plan, and this is one of only a minority of locations which overlaps with a site of nature conservation interest. The only others that I could find were the edges of the University of Bath campus, bordering Barthampton Down, and those sites bordering the River Avon. In my view, this application for this particular site does not adequately address the issues and challenges of the site. Fundamentally, it has not met the requirements to mitigate harm to on-site ecology, and in an effort to deal with its ecological features, it's resulted in a proposed development that makes too many compromises for existing and future residents. I'll focus my comments on these two areas: the ecological significance of the site and the design and build quality of the proposed development. Local Plan Policy SB 17, which allocates this site for around 40 dwellings, also states that we must identify and assess the ecological interests of the site and protect and enhance these aspects to mitigate, avoid or minimise the effects of development. The consultation response from the Council's ecologist states that the proposals remain likely to result in substantial harm to an SNCI and habitats and species of county importance, resulting in a net loss of biodiversity. She also states that the ecological mitigation hierarchy has not been met and that uncertainty remains with regards to whether or not there will be a net loss in tufa habitat. So members must consider carefully whether this particular application has done a good enough job at minimising the effects of development at this site and meeting the requirements of its local plan designation. Is the site right for this scale of development, or could we reduce harm by seeking to build less? This site is a site of nature conservation interest and is of county level importance. And as a council, we have recently declared an ecological emergency with a commitment to preserve and enhance ecology in our planning role. Given the inevitable harm to on-site ecology, the proposal is to offset this loss by recreating habitat on land at Pennyquick. This does not mitigate harm to the site, rather it accepts the loss in this location in favour of compensation elsewhere out of the city. However, there is no certainty about the success of the proposal to translocate and recreate tufa at Pennyquick, and limited detail about how this will be achieved. And importantly, the forecast for net gain also refers only to grassland, not wetland habitat. This application has also received objections from landscape and conservation officers, and their comments reflect the wider concerns of local residents about the design and build of the proposed application. One of the key issues is that proposed development does not accord with the style of neighbouring properties. Those who attended the site visit will have noted that most of the neighbouring properties are Bath stone, with some finished in render and none are built in brick. The landscape layout of the site also means there are no open public spaces for residents to enjoy, and the retained tufa flushes will need to be fenced off. The council's ecologist has also criticised the landscape proposals of the site as inappropriate for an SNCI, and she recommends that improvements need to be made to further reduce impacts to the site. Many local residents have ongoing concerns about the management of water on the site and the risk of future flooding to neighbouring properties if drainage systems are not adequately maintained. I also have particular concerns with regard to pedestrian access to the site, with only one pavement of reduced width at 1.5 metres. I'm disappointed that this planning application comes with no tangible improvements to local pedestrian or cycling infrastructure. I also share local residents' concerns about the impact of additional traffic on this section of Englishcombe Lane. It is a narrow section of road and there are established problems with speeding as well as parking in this location. The new junction and requirements for double yellow lines to prevent parking nearby will have a substantial impact on existing residents, increasing parking further up the road. So in summary, I feel that this application is unacceptable and should not be permitted. It demonstrates a series of compromises which I feel will reduce quality of life for future residents as well as harm the local environment. And I feel strongly that as a council, we must look again at this site and reconsider its allocation in the local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillor. I've just whizzed through too far there. Can I invite then from the members of the committee questions for the case officer? I believe Councillor Jackson was the first to put in a request for a question. Councillor Jackson, are you there?
I don't think she's on at the moment, Mark. I think she's disappeared.
Okay. Any other questions for the officer? Councillor Rigby. Councillor Rigby?
Sorry, Chair, the unmute button wasn't working. Yes, my question is, I seem to hear that the applicant said something like the two-for flush.
Eleanor Jackson
wasn't considered.
Joined the meeting.
Wasn't considered as part of the overall calculation when you were looking at the 64% net increase. But then later on seemed to say that it was. Could you just confirm for us whether or not the two-for flushes have been included in the stated figure for the gain in ecological diversity? Thanks, Tessa.
No, they've not been included. I think because of the complexity of them, they've not been included in that figure. So they've got their own compensatory strategy.
Thank you.
Councillor McPhee.
It's sort of the same question, really. If they've not been calculated, does that figure of 64.9% stand up? Because if we're losing two-for in the original site and we can't calculate or project in how much we're going to do in the Pennyquick site, it seems to me that 64.9% doesn't stand up.
Well, I think it's 0.9% with the other habitats. I think the net gain is a different consideration. So net gain is slightly separate to the compensation measures. So you need to have a look at avoidance, mitigation, and last step compensation. So you need to look at whether there's a compensatory strategy for what's being lost on site. And then there's also the net gain considerations. So the net gain is looking at all biodiversity, but the two-for flush hasn't been included in it because it is complex. So I'm comfortable with a strategy in place to replace and create a two-for, but as we've said before, there's not 100% certainty that it would be created. That's why it's not in the calculations.
So who sets that calculation for biodiversity net gain then? That's
undertaken through a DEFRA. DEFRA, yeah. So it's a relatively new kind of system, and the figure is quite arbitrary. But so we wouldn't put the key thing really is actually what is the compensation, because that figure is quite a new thing really. But our ecologist is comfortable with how it's being worked out, and she's comfortable with that figure.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson, are you there? You did put down that you had a question for the officer.
Yeah, I mean, obviously because I lost the connection, I'm going to not be able to vote, but there are a couple of things that I find really important. I wondered if the officer could explain the improved entrance to the site and whether this was really safe, only having one entrance to the site off the highway.
Yeah, I might leave the technical details to our highways officer.
I wondered if Mr. Cox could explain exactly, because from your diagram I couldn't quite understand it.
Sure. If I just remind members that the fact there's only one access or one pedestrian access was due to the need to provide bat mitigation measures and more green landscaping. So that's why we've accepted the one pedestrian route. But I'll leave to Darren, if that's okay, Darren, to talk about the technical aspects.
Yeah, of course, Tessa. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. We consider that the single point of access is suitable. The plan has recently been revised. The original plan showed a traditional Bellmouth junction at Englishcombe Lane. This has been revised, I believe, in early May. It is now shown as a vehicle crossover, which is the Highway Authority's preferred means of access and actually provides pedestrians with priority across the junction. The carriageway width is 4.8 metres, which exceeds the minimum required by manual for streets of of 4.1 to allow two cars to safely pass one another. So that means that larger vehicles and a car will be able to pass one another, such as supermarket delivery vehicles and also refuse collection vehicles. We acknowledge that there is only one pedestrian footpath, which is 1.5 metres wide. But again, Manual for Streets does say that 1.5 metres is sufficient to allow access for a wheelchair user and an ambient person side by side. So we are satisfied that that is acceptable in this instance. The alternative would be to investigate a 6.3 metre wide shared surface, which would provide absolutely no protection to vulnerable road users from motor vehicles.
Councillor Jackson, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that clarifies things a lot. Thank you very much. My other question is whether the TUFA, I'm not obviously going to be able to vote because of having the break in transmission, but my other important question is, are we satisfied that the TUFA can be replicated on the Penicuik site satisfactorily? Because what I'm seeming to get from our council ecologist is that the answer is no.
We sought an opinion from a professor at the university who specialises in TUFAs. He's comfortable that the Penicuik site is suitable to establish a TUFA. We looked at a couple of sites, and this was the most suitable one. He is a geological expert, so he's looking at it more from a geological point of view. So the ecologist has highlighted that she is not 100% certain that the habitats can be recreated, but geologically it can be recreated. So we have we've seen a strategy and a methodology to secure that, and the professor at the university is comfortable that that should work, but the ecologist has highlighted that this is something that hasn't been tested before, so there's going to be that uncertainty because of the lack of precedent for this. But there is a robust strategy in place that we would secure through a Section 106 agreement, which would be ongoing, would be monitored in the long term.
You see, what occurred to me was that as we went and visited the meadow, which is incredibly beautiful, and then we went over to the substitute site, it seemed to me that below the clover field was much more sunny. And I was wondering if you had factored into this question of the transfer, the fact that that will be a warmer spot and will be more vulnerable to global warming.
I mean, Professor looked at the land conditions, etc. So they have had a look at that. We would secure more information through a condition if the application was recommended for approval. But as I said, we are satisfied with the strategy in place at the moment.
And I've got another question, if I might. I'm worried about the legal implications, of the fact that the work has already commenced, because you may remember, well, it's a legal officer to answer this one. You may recall that with Maynard's Terrace, Clutton, which we refused for housing, we lost at appeal because the planning inspector said the highways had already begun the work for that site. And the fact that that work has begun invalidated our position, and the appellants won. Is the same thing going to happen here now, as this work has already begun, apparently? That if work starts on a site, you make it impossible to refuse the application because you'll lose at appeal.
No, that's not my view. Any application will be treated the same if it's retrospectively or not retrospectively. I think the works that have started on site potentially have to do with reptile translocation, although I know one of the speakers did mention other works, but as I said, we didn't see anything on site last week apart from, I think, the reptile translocation.
Richard, did you want to add to that?
I was just going to say, for clarification on the when work starts on site, whether that would have an impact at an appeal stage with the Maynard Terrace application. The Maynard Terrace application was different in that at the time we didn't have an adopted local plan, so we were in this transition period between two local plans, and the presumption in favour of sustainable development and the NPPF kicked in. So the allowance of that application wasn't predicated on works having commenced on site. And I think, as Tess says with this, we've not had any reports of construction work or development work starting on the Englishcombe Lane site. I think it is the translocation work to do with ecology, which falls outside the remit of development. So if they are putting in place the infrastructure to facilitate translocation, that's not a material commencement of this application, irrespective of whether planning permission has been granted or not.
Okay, thank
and
you.
The other question is, it has for a long time been government policy, iterated in different planning policy acts and so on, that brownfield sites should be given precedence for development over greenfield sites. I'm asking myself, this is obviously a greenfield site. Is it legitimate to develop it before brownfield sites, and of course I could give you a list of them, are developed?
Well, I mean, this is an allocated site, so I think we have to accept that the principle is accepted on the site through its allocation. You need to consider the technical details.
Okay, thank you. Can I move on to Councillor Hodge? Did you want to? I hope you have a question for the officer.
It's just a question going back to the detail of the two-foot. I just wanted the applicant detail on the two-foot that's being retained on site. I just wanted Tessa to clarify that on site there are 5 flushes currently, and this is 50% of one flush that will be retained on site. And the quality of that site might be, my understanding was the quality of the site might be uncertain, but it is only 50% of one flush out of 5 that will be retained on site. Just wanted to confirm that.
That's what is reported in the ecology report, yes.
Okay, was there anything else, Lucy? No. No. Councillor McPhee, did you have another question?
Well, it was just actually for Richard Storr, since some people had mentioned their concerns about the drainage, and he did, when we were on site, give us a good explanation of how the drainage had been set up to avoid flooding. I wondered if it was worth him just saying a couple of words on that.
Yes, because drainage was described as a gain, but there are questions about ongoing maintenance as well. So does somebody have that knowledge of the drainage, proposed drainage?
I can come in on that. It might be useful, Tess, if you could bring up, I don't know if you can share your screen and bring up the drainage plan again that you had in your presentation, please. It might be easier to talk to the plan.
Oops, sorry, I just tried. I think it was on there.
I think it's slide 22, Tess.
There you go, that should be it, thanks.
Right, so the drainage plan on here, you can see the on the northern boundary of the site, there's a series of dark shaded rectangular boxes, and these are catch fill tanks. And then round the edge of the site, you can see blue annotations and blue lines, which is the direction of the pipes that will take the water off site. So the prevailing, well, it's a sloping site from south to north, and the water at present washes down the site. The predominant concentration of surface water flow is over that sort of central area, which is excluded from the development area. The exclusion of that partially to preserve the tufa flushes in that location, and that's also a location of the mud lobes for the landslip. So there's a lot of water coming through this area. There's a blue line that you can see at the edge of the that excluded area that takes the water into the catch fill tanks, and then it directs it down to the highway. And all round the southern boundary of the site are the counterfort stability drains, which catch groundwater and direct the water flow into the tanking system. And the idea of the tanks is that they act as big pits within the ground with that control the flow rate of water off the site. So the water is captured and then discharged in a managed fashion around the northern boundary and then down the entrance into the drainage on Englishcombe Lane. So the idea of this at the moment is an untouched open field. The water flows into the site from the south as it's coming down slope, and it will just follow natural topography across the site. If you get extreme heavy downpour or saturation of the ground, which means that the water can't be held in situ in the ground, you then get the overland wash off, which I think there's been some photos submitted with objections of ponding on Englishcombe Lane, and those are the kind of the events that overwhelm the existing drainage system. The idea of this strategy is to capture and release the water in a controlled manner. It's a pretty standard methodology to land drainage, and certainly in this area we've had some quite large development sites, sort of multiple hundred house sites, where they've adopted similar strategies to this on sites that have been prone to surface water, groundwater flooding in the past, that have worked very successfully. Our drainage team is satisfied with the proposal put forward. It's a comprehensive strategy, and we're satisfied that it achieves the objectives of drainage for the site. I hope that clarifies.
Anything on future maintenance? Who's responsible for future maintenance?
There's a maintenance strategy which has been put forward by the applicant, which has been considered by our drainage team and is acceptable, or is suitable for the ongoing management. That would be secured through the Section 106 agreement, and it's usual with new housing developments that as part of the management company that's set up to manage and maintain the sort of public areas of the site would have responsibility for various things, including drainage. So there will be a contribution as part of that management arrangement that people have to pay in, or residents would have to pay into. And then the cleaning regime set out in the draft management strategy that was submitted with the application would be adhered to. So we'd secure that through the 106 agreement, and that would be binding in perpetuity on any future landowners or any future management companies.
Thank you. Hal, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Councillor Hughes, did you have a question for officers?
Yes, thank you. Hi, Tessa. Just a quick question. When we had the technical briefing, the ecologist, she didn't seem to share the confidence that that we're seeing today in this scheme, but she did explain that for the scheme to work, it required ecologists, geologists, and hydrologists to work together to come up with a scheme to work. Yet, despite persistent requests, she hadn't received any reports from the hydrologists. Do you know if that's happened now? Has she received those?
I don't know. Sarah hasn't kind of had sight of those reports, but she has secured it through a condition, so we could secure that through a condition.
But that's a
forward.
part of actually proving that the scheme has a chance of working, is that there should be a hydrologist report before we can even move to that point. So is that like?
Yeah, Sarah hasn't reviewed a report. No, she hasn't reviewed the report that she referenced in our technical briefing.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for the officer before we move to the debate? Councillor Hounsell, I believe you requested to speak in the debate first.
All right, thank you, Chair. It's a complex application, so I'll just speak to a few points. The principle of building on this site has been established through a number of plans, and most recently the placemaking plan, and all of those will have had inspectors' hearings to to look at the validity of designating this site. So the principle of building has been established. Flooding, the flooding risk, we've just had a very good briefing from Richard Stott, and I'm perfectly satisfied that it will actually improve the drainage situation in that area. In terms of ecology, it's accepted that there will be an ecological gain, though obviously it's very hard to quantify that in precise percentage terms, but there will be an ecological gain if we put the tufa flushes to one side. The tufa habitats, it says that we heard in the report or the presentation earlier by the applicant that 73% of those will be retained on site. There's no guarantee that tufa flushes that are on site will be secure, protected forever. In fact, one of the speakers spoke about the constant shift of the land, and there's many other factors that actually might damage the tufa sites where they are. The professor that's been referred to does think that the geology at Pennyquick is suitable and that transfer is achievable. And I've heard the comment that it's actually the same hill that we're talking about. And rather than view any transfer as being against an ecological emergency, I would think I would argue that it would demonstrate the seriousness that the council is taking about ecological issues, in that such a comprehensive scheme is being proposed. If it was successful, the transfer of the habitats, that knowledge and the expertise would be of great value to the wider community. And the Pennyquick site, has been mentioned, is 4 times larger than the site at present. I'm very excited by the idea of additional affordable and social housing, adding to the mix of housing in the area. And the officer and the committee have got to weigh up all the policies in the round and come to a conclusion. And my conclusion is that we should accept the officer's recommendation to permit. And in fact, I would propose a motion to that effect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hounslow. You propose that we should accept the officer's recommendation. Does anybody, I can't see everybody's faces. Would anybody like to indicate in the chat that they're happy to second that, or just speak?
I'm quite happy to second it. To
second that. So we've got a motion to accept the officer's recommendation, seconded by Councillor Davis. We'll just continue the debate, and then I have next to speak in the debate was Councillor Sue Craig.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to, before I say what I was originally going to say, pick up on something that Councillor Hounslow said. We are providing affordable and social housing through this scheme. I don't think that's correct. We're providing affordable but not social housing. Could Tessa perhaps clarify that?
Tessa, I think that is correct. In fact, Graham Sabon mentioned that this was affordable housing.
Yeah, I mean, affordable housing has got a very wide definition. The standard that we would secure would be 75% social rent and 25% intermediate. So 25% intermediate may be, for example, shared ownership. And in social rent would be, I guess, what you traditionally would have seen as affordable housing. So there will be those, and that will be secured through an affordable housing scheme going forward.
So very slowly for me there. Say 40% affordable.
Well, we'd secure, we through the planning policy, we'd secure 30% because that's the requirement through the policy. The applicant has offered more, but the Section 106 would only secure 30%. Of that 30% or of that 11, 75% would be, the starting negotiation point will be 75% will be social rent and 25% intermediate. So intermediate would be things like shared ownership.
Okay, I'm with you. Okay, so yeah, so social rent. But you wanted to say something in the debate, Councillor Craig?
Yes, thank you. So as far as I understand, this site was allocated for housing some 20 years ago, and I know it's been through 2 further consultations since then, but it would have been as a carried forward item, so maybe it didn't get the attention it needs. I don't know, perhaps it did, but whatever. It would originally have been grazed pasture land and has ironically become a much more important site ecologically, exactly because it was set aside for housing. Much has changed in the last 20 years, and we are more aware of the importance of sites like this to the preservation of our ecology. My preference would be that this site is removed from the local plan and designated a protected site in the same way that the Pennyquick, the proposed mitigation site, will become, and that we look for less impactful green belt land. But I realise this is not for debate here. So all of that aside, I struggle to see how the addition of 17 houses, so assuming that maybe 20 could be built, as was mentioned in the last meeting, and leave the tufa intact, justifies the risk of moving the tufa to another site at risk because there is no precedent, and rehoming all of the creatures with all that that entails. So I'm afraid I would not have been supporting the officer's decision, and I will not be supporting Councillor Hounsell's motion either. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Rigby.
I don't believe I'm next, Chair. I believe Councillor Hodges before me.
Councillor. Oh no, that was. I think that was a question for the officer. You specified you wanted to speak in the debate. I'm just going back over the list to see who's requested to speak in the debate.
Okay, sorry, Chair. Apologies. Councillor Craig has just said a couple of the things that I was going to say. My other concerns are in terms of doing the ecological mitigation strategy. My understanding from reading all the documents is that the fact that one area is 4 times the size of another isn't actually the determinant of how successful it's going to be. It's more about what the actual ground is like, how the wind blows over, what the water levels are like. So we can't be as simple as because we've got something that's 4 times the size of another, that's automatically going to be okay. I am concerned, although it was really good to hear Richard's explanation of the drainage. I was concerned by one of the things that he said, which I think we also heard at the site visit, that the future owners would have the cost of upkeep of this drainage system passed on to them as they bought their properties. And although I absolutely welcome the fact that were this to go ahead, there'd be 30% affordable housing there, I think it is slightly naive to think that if we are having a lot of people on the site who are in need of our affordable housing provision, that they would also have enough money to potentially put together for what could potentially be quite an expensive thing if the drainage system needs to be redone or needs to be maintained going forward. I totally accept that in the past that this was considered to be a good place for housing. And although it isn't how I would like it to be, I absolutely accept that that's the principle. However, given the fact it's the principle doesn't mean that in terms of design and in terms of what's currently being proposed, we have to go along with it. And actually, I think Tessa did a brilliant job of highlighting what the decision is that we have to make. And I'm looking at page 44 of our report, where it talks about conclusion on ecology issues, because I think the decision we have to make in front of us is, do we think that gaining 37 houses with 30% affordable on this particular site outweighs the harm that will be done to the ecology, when we haven't done a sequential test about other sites that are allocated for housing, that may be brownfield, that may be easier to develop. So although I accept the balance is very, very tight, I am going to be, on this occasion, not supporting Councillor Hounsell, and I'm going to be voting against the motion and voting to overturn the officer's decision. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And then I think potentially it's Councillor Jackson, and then Councillor Davis, and then Councillor Hodge. Unless Richard Stott, did you want to jump in on anything? Or
I just wasn't sure if you wanted any further clarification on the management company issue and payment, because I think that came up at the site visit. And one thing with any new development site, it's not unusual for management companies to be formed to look after the interests of the sort of communal areas, as it were, the sort of public space within them. So the vast majority of new housing estates, and going back the last 15, 20 years, will have management companies set up that all residents pay into. So it's a very standard practice with estates. When it comes to the affordable housing side of things, their service charges are capped, so they wouldn't be paying at the same rate as, say, a freehold landowner who bought the property outright. And so Curo, being one of the largest affordable housing providers or managers in this area, if they or a similar body were to take on these properties, it's likely that they would be that they would be the ones that contribute that fee, with a service charge paid to them as part of the rent by whoever's renting the properties. So it's not an unusual situation, and it's common on all of these new applications in new housing sites. So whether it was this site or another site elsewhere, anything that has a drainage requirement or a landscape requirement or maintenance requirement will have similar arrangements for management companies. I hope that clarifies.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson, did you wish to speak in the debate?
I do indeed. Yes, please. And following on from what Mr. Stott has just said, I'd like to point out that a certain well-known developer in the Soma Valley has not provided a management company. There's been a gap of 2 years in Westfield. So I don't see how we could write a condition to say that there must be a management company in place to ensure that there's proper maintenance, etc., etc. Because if the management company decides to walk away, you know, the residents can have problems. That's the first point. Second point, I wanted to say I was in about 3 different minds about this application before the debate started. But what's clinched my decision that Councillor Rigby is right, and we should reject this, is actually something completely different. I think the urban design is appalling. Those little chunky houses are quite inappropriate on a green hillside. It's more or less washed over by green fields. You've got some quite substantial, attractive houses in the 2 roads that run across one corner, Englishcombe Lane and Stirtingdale, and the whole area. And we're going to get these chunky timber squares put in, and particularly the apartment block, I'm afraid I don't like. I couldn't see that they got much in the way of a garden either. And it's just not right in a very suburban, green, semi-rural area to put that sort of housing up, I'm afraid. And finally, the site visit was immensely helpful, I found, and I would contest what Councillor Hansel's saying. I know I'm a bit spatially challenged.
Chair, can I ask, sorry to interrupt, but Councillor Jackson said she wasn't taking part in this debate because she lost.
No, I said I was not able to vote. That's different. I am not able to vote because I lost transmission for a few minutes.
Hang on a sec. Let's just see.
I just wanted to finish by saying I did not think that the mitigation site was 4 times the meadow. That's a point of fact. I'm surely entitled to ask if that is the case or not.
Yeah, so Councillor Jackson, if I can interrupt. No, the wording at the beginning says that you're not entitled to vote, but there's nothing to get in the way of you contributing to the debate.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But you're done.
So that's my contribution to the debate.
Thank you very much.
Even though I will de facto abstain because I had that short break in transmission and didn't hear what Councillor David said.
Okay, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. And I am supporting the proposal put forward by Councillor Hounsell. It's probably one of the most difficult decisions we've had to make, and I've been on planning quite a while now. And I'd like to thank all the officers and speakers for all their input to make sure that we are aware of all the issues surrounding this application. But I think what's clinched it for me in the end is the balance and the amount of work that's gone into the ecology mitigation, which is the vital section for me. We need to remember we've got policies in place and we have to weigh up those policies when we're making our decisions. And in this case, I support the recommendation from the planning officer, who I think has made a very clear analysis of the position when she's done a summary of it and come to her conclusion. And it's for this reason that I'm quite happy to support the officer's recommendation that we permit this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Let me just whiz down. Councillor Hodge, I believe, is next.
So from my point of view, I do not support the proposal. I would like to note that the make some points in relation to the conservation area and landscape officer felt it also. I would like to note that they felt it not to be acceptable in terms of the design, which I do agree with Councillor Jackson's comments on the design, and also I do feel there is the potential for these properties to be viewed within the wider view. So I agree with conservation officers finding there. But most importantly, I want to move on to the ecology, and Councillor Household's statement, the ecological gain, if we put the two for habitat to one side. I mean, what was important to me, I felt, was the importance of the designation, the SNCI designation, which I didn't really understand in advance, and I've only read up about it. But I feel that the ecologist's in principle objection was due to the damage to the SNCI, which is contrary to planning policy NE3. And this designation level really came into place because the SSSI and the special protection area, which afford legal protection, were really felt not to, they left out a lot of local sites that were important at local level. And DETRA in April 2000 defined objectives for local councils to identify these important sites. Each local council identified them, sites that might be threatened habitats by development, agricultural practices and neglect. So we identified this as a site. We have identified it for a good reason, and I feel it should not be threatened by development and should not also be neglected by the council. We have a responsibility to maintain this site, having identified it. I think this is even more important 20 years after the initiative came into being, especially having recognised an ecological or environmental emergency. So I feel, and I also feel that there is definite lack of certainty, as the ecologist does, with regards to the compensatory habitat creation. I would also like to say that we had a very useful, lengthy discussion with the ecologist for the benefit of people listening, and were able to ask questions in depth. And I would also like to thank Jess David for bringing this very important application to our attention.
Thank you, Councillor Hodge. Councillor McPhee. And then Councillor Craig.
As with everyone else, I find this very difficult. And I balance off the fact that this place, rightly or wrongly, for 20 years has been considered that it can be built on. On the other hand, if we can make the TUFA aspect work, we're going to end up with 5 hectares of nature reserve. And when we were there, it was very clear it was a relatively small part of that piece of land that was biologically significant. So we will end up with quite a lot more nature reserve. And so reluctantly, I will support Councillor Hansel, but I would like somehow to put some kind of condition that the people who are looking after Pennyquick make a determined and continuous effort to create a TUFA, not just some 10-minute job.
Thank you, Councillor McPhee. Councillor Craig.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to follow on from something Richard Stott said about the management company. And I know management companies are a common thing, and I understand about the caps of charge and everything, but I think the difference with this site, because of its topography and all of the complications and everything, it is very high risk. And I just feel that the chances of something going wrong, and we discussed this at the site visit, of something going wrong at some point in the future, that the residents who live there are going to have to somehow find, including Curo, if it's Curo, having to find the money to pay for, is so much more higher, which, you know, I'm just astounded that this was ever thought to be a suitable site, but it just confirms that thought. And just to follow on from something Councillor McPhee said, yes, I agree that you may say that the TUFA only count for a small part of the land there, but don't forget everything else that's on that land. It's covered with wildlife, it's covered in vertebrates, it's badgers, you know, there's much more than just the TUFA. They are extremely important because they are so rare. There are no others in the county, and we have absolutely no guarantee whatsoever that they're going to work. You know, if we could say, right, we'll move them and then wait for 10 years and make sure they're okay and then we'll build, then fine, but we can't do that. So just don't forget everything else that's on that piece of land. It's not just the TUFA. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a little few more now. Councillor Rigby again, and then Councillor Hodge.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you for giving me a second bite. I want to come back on a couple of things that I've heard being said. And Councillor Jackson was entirely right, and it was a point that I neglected to make. It's not just the council ecologist who has got an in-principle objection to this. If you look at our internal consultees, we have the conservation officer who objects, we have the ecologist who objects, we have the landscape person who objects, and we have the urban design person who objects. So no one is objecting currently to the principle of building on here, though whether or not that's something we'd like to review if this doesn't go through. What I am looking at is what we have in front of us, which is what we have to make our decision on. And what we have in front of us, I believe, is a development that will damage, and everyone accepts it will damage the ecology on that particular site, with absolute no guarantee at all that there will be the mitigation methods will work. And in addition to that, what we are building is out of context with its local area, is not in the materials that are prevalent, i.e. the Bath stone, is actually quite boxy and quite put together. So you can agree with the principle of housing, but completely disagree with what you have in front of you. And during the course of this debate, I think my mind that was more finely balanced on which way I was going to go has actually been made up further, that I most definitely will be objecting to this.
Councillor Hodge.
I just want to add on, I hope I can be heard, add on the point. I was concerned that Councillor McPhee, I really feel the ecologists made it absolutely clear that there was no certainty that we were going to gain the habitats that we had lost on the offsetting site, and I think that is such an important point to take on board. And I agree with Councillor Rigby's the rest of that summing up.
Okay, I'm going to use my privilege as chair to say something as well. All development on a greenfield site causes harm. Now, any kind of mitigation on another site it may or may not work. Hopefully, you know, and you hope it will work. By the DEFRA calculation, and this is so a government imposed calculation, we got a 64.9% biodiversity net gain. Now, we have in our planning policies the requirement for a biodiversity net gain. There's a recognition that quite a lot of development causes harm to biodiversity, so that where we have development, we are looking for some gain from the loss of the biodiversity on the site that's to be developed. So by this calculation, 64.5%, 64.9% is quite a lot of biodiversity net gain. And on top of that, the size of the land that will be given over to wildlife is 4 times the size of the site that is going to be developed. And of the site that is going to be developed, only about 3/4 of it will be developed, where the other quarter will be used, will be maintained for biodiversity, for the landscaping and the wildlife. So I think on that sense, we have to look at the precedent we're setting. We declared a climate emergency, but that and we declared a nature emergency, a biodiversity emergency. But does that mean we have to stop all development where some habitat is lost? Or do we set a precedent whereby we say, well, look, we're going to accept that harm because in this instance, and in this instance, we have almost 65% biodiversity net gain by the government's own calculation, and the size of the land we're securing for that mitigation is 4 times larger. So I think that's the precedent we're setting. And I agree with Councillor Hounsell. The principle of building on the site has been established. I think the challenge of building homes that are both carbon or aspiring to be carbon neutral and trying to also fit in with homes that have been built that are nowhere near carbon neutral means that there will be differences in design, although perhaps I'm not quite, I do take Councillor Rigby's point that the nature of these buildings aren't necessarily complementary to the surrounding area. I think not only are some of them going to be affordable, but living in them will be affordable. So in that sense, I do support Councillor Hounsell's motion. If there is any other comments for the debate, I think I'm going to move to the vote. And let me call up the right piece of, I'm not getting anyone.
Councillor Craig wants to speak.
Yeah,
Councillor Craig.
I just wanted to say the precedent that we are setting is that it's okay to develop on an SNCI. That's the precedent we're setting.
Councillor Hodge, are you adding? You're diverting my attention to Councillor Craig. Councillor Jackson, I take your point. So hang on, we're going to be moving to the vote. I've lost my place again on here. So the motion is to support the officer's recommendation, and that's a delegation to permit. Are we delegating? I'll just check. Are we delegating to permit, or we're supporting the officer's recommendation? So support the officer's recommendation. Okay, we're supporting the officer's recommendation. So I will go down alphabetically, and if you could clearly state whether you are for, against, or abstaining. So Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Craig.
Against.
Councillor Davis.
For.
Councillor Hodge.
Against.
Councillor Hounsell.
For.
Councillor Hughes.
Against.
Councillor Jackson can't vote. She missed part of the debate. Councillor McPhee.
For.
Councillor McCabe. For. Councillor Rigby.
Against.
Marie, can you give me the maths on that?
Yep, that's 5 in favour and 4 against. So that's carried.
So that is carried. So the motion is to support the officer's recommendation to permit development on the land to the rear at Englishcombe Lane. I've been reminded that we possibly need to take a break. So after that, can I say we'll take a 5-minute comfort break back here at 15:39. Is that right? 15:39. Yes. So 5 minutes. Thank you.
Can I get it placed on record that we have to improve the technology?
Yeah.
I know it wouldn't have made any difference to the debate because you would have used your casting vote as chair in favour of this one. But the fact I lost connection and couldn't get the right phone number to get back on again, I regret very much. And we have to do something to improve our connections if we're going to hold meetings like this in the future.
Thank you. We'll certainly pass that on.
Yeah, we can look into that.
Right, how are we doing? People reappearing one by one. Okay, we're nearly all back. So, a couple more councillors. Councillor Clark, well done. And just Councillor Hodge.
I'm here.
And you're there too. So we're all back, I think. I haven't got a complete picture. Can anybody spot anybody who's missing? Okay, so if we move on then to the next item, which is the Royal National Hospital for Rheumatic Diseases, or the MIN. Can I ask the case officer once again, Tessa Hamden, to present her report, please?
Thank you. I'll just try and share my screen again. Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, this proposal relates to the Mineral Hospital located on Upper Borough Walls in Bath. There is a planning application and listed building application, and I'll deal with both applications together in this presentation. There are separate committee reports for each application. The description for these applications are very long and they can be seen in full on the committee report, so these are just the shortened versions on this slide. So in general, the applications relate to the change of use of the former hospital to a hotel to include publicly accessible restaurant, cafe, health spa and meeting rooms. There are a number of internal alterations, including changes to the layout to facilitate this change of use. There are a number of external alterations, the most significant being the 3.5-storey extensions to the west wing. The development also comprises alterations, including roof alterations and replacement infill extensions, as well as other external alterations. So this is the site location plan with the application site edged in red. The building is a Grade 2 star listed building, formerly occupied the Mineral Hospital, which completed its relocation to the RUH site at the end of last year. The site is within the City of Bath Conservation Area and the World Heritage Sites. The garden and car park are to the rear forms part of the Scheduled Nature Monument. The east and west wing is dissected by Parsonage Lane with an archway walkway linking the two. Bridewell Lane runs to the west. To the south are several residential properties, including their garden courtyard areas. As well as the main building, there are several listed buildings nearby. The block plan and photographs show the building in context with the surrounding built form and features, including floor trees within the site. There is also a lodge building within the southeast corner of the site. The lodge currently houses one of the mosaics, which we moved to allow it to be publicly accessible in the main building. The other is in its original position in the west wing basement. To the rear of the west wing is located a garden and car park area. So before I move on to the elevations, a quick reminder of the main facades of the Mineral Hospital. The first photograph is taken near the corner of Union Street and Upper Borough Walls, looking at the east wing with the west wing in the background. The second is a bird's eye view of primarily the rear of the west wing with the garden and the parking area in the foreground. So there are a significant amount of plans that have accompanied this application, and I'll just run through the most pertinent ones. So these are the existing elevations. The top elevation is the west elevation of the main west wing, as well as the lodge that faces onto Bridewell Lane. From here, you can see through to the garden area. This elevation also shows unfortunate additions and plant on the roof of the main building. The bottom elevation is the main frontage of the building that faces onto Upper Borough Walls. You can see how the east wing is linked to the west wing by the walkway arch. The low windows here are at basement level. So the top is the existing south elevation of the west wing. This faces onto the car park and garden area to the rear, and is the elevation most visible to the neighbouring occupiers to the rear. The ground floor contains the chapel, and these elevations show the apse, as does the existing elevation of the west wing below. The apse faces onto Parsonage Lane. The existing car park is marked on this plan and is currently accessed via Parsonage Lane. So these are the existing west elevations of the east wing, which faces onto Parsonage Lane, and finally the east elevation of the east wing, which faces onto Union Street. So looking inside the building, there have been a number of alterations over recent years as the building is adapted to a modern hospital. As explained in the report, the open wards is a key feature of the building. This photograph shows a room used historically as a ward and its most recent use as an office. The next slide shows more open wards, and although there are limited historic features, they remain as their original function. So the next set of slides shows the floor plans and the proposed demolition within the building. I think it's a little bit difficult to see, but the thick red lines indicate the removal of significant floor. The loss of significant fabric is relatively limited, with much of the demolition removal of fabric relating to much newer additions. The original floor is necessary. The removal of the original floor is necessary in a small part of the installation of lifts. I think you can just about see the blue, which is the original fireplace. So this is the basement and the ground floor. Moving up, this is the first floor mezzanine. So you can see the turret at the back is being removed to make way for the extension, but this is a later addition, so it doesn't form a significant element. And this is the second and third floor. And this is the roof, demolition of the roof, so there's not significant fabric there. So the next slide shows the proposed elevations. So the top one is the proposed West Street elevation facing Bridewell Lane. It shows the new roof extension of the west wing following removal of plants. This is clad in zinc with windows to line with historic openings below. The new 3.5-storey extension is linked to the main west wing by a light wing conservatory structure. This opens out onto a private garden area. The extension is built in bar stone, double height split face bar stone face panels under a zinc roof. The bottom elevation is facing upper borough walls. You can see on the east wing, the plant on the roof, lift shaft removed, louver replaced with windows to facilitate rooms in the basement as well. There's also the addition of the roof to the east wing. So this is the north elevation of the bedroom extension viewed from inside the conservatory structure. So this north elevation will form an internal wall. This again sits next to the retained garden and lodge building. The bottom elevation is the east-facing elevation facing Parsonage Lane. This will form the access to the restaurant from within the glazed link. The upper part of the bedroom of the extension is set back from Parsonage Lane to ensure the setting of the chapel apse is not harmed, and that forms a key view when approaching from upper borough walls. This elevation at the top faces the neighbouring dwellings, and I'll go through this in a bit more detail on a later slide. The boundary wall and gable end of the neighbouring building are shown in a silhouette. This design incorporates louvres and frosted glass to minimise overlooking, but I will go through that again shortly. And this is the proposed west and east elevation of the east wing. So this gives a little bit more detail about the materials of the elevation. So the materials include ashlar bar stone with recessed split face bar stone and zinc panels, adding articulation to the facades. And the images show the examples of materials to be used. So this slide of the southwest elevation details measures included to design out overlook into neighbouring properties. The windows on this elevation are limited and either include louvres to angle views away from neighbours, or will obscurely glazed or be obscurely glazed below eye height. You can see that on the roof. So this is an overlooking diagram to show distances between buildings. It doesn't show that clearly, I'm afraid, on these slides, but it just shows the comparative distances between buildings in the city centre location. And the slide to the image to the right is the blue is extension, and the green is the neighbouring gardens with the properties adjacent. So these are some photographs taken from the neighbouring courtyard. So this is the boundary wall that is adjacent to forms the boundary wall between the two sites. The bottom is taken from the corner of the building and is the closest window to the application site and the extension. So this is looking across towards Saw Close at the top, and the bottom is looking across the garden towards the rear elevation of the extension. So the 3-story and half-story extension will be brought closer towards this boundary. This is a photograph taken from the ground floor property of the neighbouring site. So looking across their courtyard up towards the application site. And this is taken from the upper floors of the property. So you can see to the right is the application site, and then in front of that is the new Saw Close development. So these are the proposed basement plans. They're both the same floor plans, but the one to the right is the blue shaded areas are those areas which the public would have supervised access to. So for example, within the basement of the east wing, there'll be spa and treatment rooms which the public will be able to access. So the ground floor contains the spa and treatment rooms, as well as further bedrooms within the hotel. So the ground floor plan, there'll be a restaurant in the chapel and the conservatory extension. There'll be active uses on Upper Borough Ward frontage, including cafe and meeting areas, etc. And there'll also be service areas on this floor, as well as bedrooms. Again, the blue shows the public accessible areas. The first floor plan, mainly bedrooms, but illustrates the main ward area, which we've sought to retain, will be retained as an open space and be used as a meeting room. This is the mezzanine and second floor plan, which is generally bedroom areas. And the third floor, which is the bedroom and plant area. So these are the landscape areas. The left, the slide shows the proposed tree planting. So there'll be 2 trees removed, but there'll be a large specimen tree and 5 other trees planted in compensation for these trees being removed. There'll also be public realm improvements on Parsonage Lane. So certain photographs of the site. So this is just the main entrance to the site, the old main entrance, and this is a picture of the garden area. This is the archway looking down towards the apse, and then the bottom slide photograph is walking down Bradwell Lane looking across to the site. So this is just a photograph from inside the chapel and then from externally. And then we have some images of the proposal. So this is inside the conservatory structure. So to the right you have the chapel, and then to the left you have the main bedroom extension. And that will form part of the restaurant and the conservatory. This is looking down Bradwell Lane, so the extension is just visible to your left. This is coming down Parsonage Lane, so as explained earlier, the building has been set back, so the chapel and apse can dominate in that view. And this is looking within the garden across to the extension and the Glazelink Conservatory. And then just a couple more images. So this again is looking across from Bradwell Lane. And this is looking from within the site towards the lodge and back towards the extension. And thank you, Chair. That concludes my presentation. This application is recommended for approval, subject to a legal agreement to secure a number of obligations, including the historical interpretation strategy and public realm improvements.
Thank you very much. We'll now move to the public speakers. And I have a number of people speaking, and I believe I've been sent a new order of speakers. I've got Jane Sampson, Pedro Ruse, Helen Wilmot, with James Sampson to sum up at the end. You're sharing 10 minutes. Is Jane Sampson there, please?
Hi, yeah.
Okay, you're off.
Thank you. I'm speaking for Emma Owens, a planning and legal professional and a solicitor qualified to advocate in the High Court. The committee have had advanced copies of her full legal submission. The development is unlawful under any correct application of the Listed Buildings Act. All policy documents are based on the underlying law and do not supersede statute. Decision makers should always refer to cases regarding the application of the highest statutory law to determine how to correctly apply the tests. In the case of Barnwell Manor Wind Energy Limited versus East Northamptonshire District Council, the Court of Appeal looked at the statutory duty to determine whether that duty was one to preserve a building, bring it back into use, or primarily to do no harm to the asset. They concluded that the duty was to do no harm. Heritage assets as significant as the Mineral Hospital should be protected from harm. This is the primary duty of planning professionals and decision makers when it comes to listed buildings. This is a strong presumption that can only be modified by an overwhelming case in the public interest. This is not a matter of the subjective judgment of decision makers. This is a clear duty in law that is actionable if not correctly applied, or if the wrong legal emphasis is applied. Numerous cases have tested this point, and many decisions have been overturned if they fail to put enough weight on protecting the building from harm. In some cases tested in the highest courts, the need for public housing and renewable energy were insufficient to overturn the presumption against harming the listed building. Even though in these cases the harm was found to be less than substantial, the threshold to reasonably sanction any degree of harm is onerously high. There is no public benefit to this proposal. The benefits are private and commercial. There is no way to interpret the law that would make the decision to allow this proposal a reasonable or even arguable one. It is something that decision makers should think about very carefully before they decide to collude in knowingly flouting the law. The harm that could result will not just affect residents close by who are adversely affected, it would affect the city detrimentally for generations to come and could set a very dangerous precedent for other important local and national public assets. It's nonsense to suggest that the only alternative to this proposal is disrepair. The council are treating this proposal just like any other development and ignoring their obligations under the Act. The updated officer's report claims to have given considerable weight to avoiding harm to the building. If so, why have they then fallen into the trap of attempting a simple balance between cost and benefit? This is exactly what the courts have identified as being the risk and the incorrect approach. The place you look to see how flexibly statute is interpreted is case law, not the back of a fag packet, common sense. The law is applied strictly to listed buildings. That is the intention of Parliament interpreted by the highest courts. Listed buildings do fall into disrepair occasionally, usually painstakingly restored in better economic times. This is not a reason to allow predatory capitalists to fillet them at will in times of economic downturn. What would our country look like if this was lawful? Thank you.
Thank you. And Pedro Ruz. Pedro, are you there? Hello? Have we got Pedro Ruz? Otherwise, we can move on. Are you all right if I move on to Helen Wilmot in the absence of Pedro? Is Helen there?
Yeah, he is, Chair. Can I just say he is there? He's looking at the screen. I don't think he can hear you.
Ah, thank you. Pedro? How do we alert Pedro that he, let me have a go. All right, he seems to be speaking, but we can't hear him.
Oh, I know.
Pedro, I'm looking at you now, but I can't hear you.
You can see him. I can't, please.
Can you?
Can I assume we've stopped the clock, Marie?
Yes, can you put something in the chat bar for him?
Chair, he needs to switch on his audio. He hasn't switched on his audio from his end. We cannot do anything from our end, unfortunately, without him allowing audio to be used on his device.
Okay. Did you get that? That you need to switch on your audio at your end? Well, in that case, perhaps we could, whilst he is struggling with technology, can I ask Helen Wilmot to speak next?
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm speaking about the revised extension plans. They won't benefit the residents at all, except for the Bath Preservation Society, not the residents. I'm pleading with you to please defer a decision until the planning committee councillors can do a site visit. Our flats are tucked away. I doubt many of the councillors even know that there's little dwellings there. You need to see it for yourself. Photos don't illustrate the perspective of what would actually be put in front of us. The extension would tower over us. It would dominate our view. It's right up against the boundary wall. It would be incredibly oppressive. We'd be completely enclosed as well. It would be like a high prison wall. My neighbour would look out of her window and it would be a matter of a metre, 2 metres away from her window. I would lose all of my sky view from my living room, and it's the only room that I have any sky view at all. Losing the trees and the huge variety of birds is absolutely heartbreaking. It's a conservation area. Everybody that lives there has enjoyed this. They found it incredibly therapeutic. We've got vulnerable adults living there. It's well documented that it's good for mental health anyway. We're very concerned about the privacy louvers of the windows. I'm not convinced that it's going to protect our privacy. Window, I would lose all of my sky view from my living room. It's the only room that I have any sky view at all. Losing the trees and the huge variety of birds is absolutely heartbreaking. It's a conservation area. Everybody that lives there has enjoyed this. They found it incredibly therapeutic. We've got vulnerable adults living there. It's well documented that it's good for mental health anyway. We're very concerned about the privacy louvers of the windows. I'm not convinced that it's going to protect our privacy. Window, I would lose all of my sky view from my living room. It's the only room that I have any sky view at all. Losing the trees and the huge variety of birds is absolutely heartbreaking. It's a conservation area.
It seems to be.
Everybody
seems to be on. We seem to have some sort of technical glitch.
Vulnerable adults live there. It's well documented that it's good for mental health anyway. We're very concerned about the privacy of the windows.
Can we?
I'm not convinced that protect our privacy window. I would lose all of my
stop recording or repeating.